Introduction to Knights in the American Drama World. Starting from the legend of Merlin, experiencing World War I, encountering Wonder Woman, and then stepping onto the lost highland, when Kai returned to the modern world, he saw an advertisement from Stark Group. There are English and American dramas, some of which are still very old dramas. Marvel is the main focus, but there are also some other film and television dramas mixed in. DC only covers, with a maximum of 1 or 2 characters, and does not add to DC's worldview. Chapter 1. Beginning, the protagonist may not appear so quickly. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Arthur, you shouldn't do that. Lancelot is a good person who deserves the title of a knight. He even saved me before. And he's also a nobleman. The young attendant Merlin complained about his own prince's inhumanity as he untied his armor for the equally young Prince Arthur. You can't throw him into the stable, that's what servants do. Shut up. You idiot. You're just a servant, you don't have the right to decide the ownership of the knighthood. The young prince impatiently scolded as he threw his iron gloves on the shelf. However, after reprimanding him, Arthur hesitated for a moment and pretended to explain in an overly heavy tone before. It's best not to let your words be heard by Father Wong. Father Wong doesn't like servants discussing things they shouldn't discuss. At this moment, Merlin was indignant that his prince had not been able to recruit an excellent knight, so he didn't pay any attention to the prince's scolding and explanation. After all, Merlin is an old fogey. He doesn't know how many times he has angered Arthur's father, the famous King Uther. Unexpectedly, King Uther, known as a tyrant in the outside world, repeatedly forgave Merlin's mistakes. Of course, this is not out of kindness, but Merlin has a good teacher and a good friend. With the help of these two, Merlin was able to turn danger into safety every time and get through the crisis safely. This also led to Merlin's increasing courage, even to the extent of daring to forge aristocratic certificates. By the way, Merlin. What family did you just say that Lancelot was from? Arthur remembered that Merlin had introduced Lancelot's background before, and at that time, Arthur didn't pay much attention. He never thought Merlin would introduce any amazing people at first. At that time, Arthur promised Merlin to have Lancelot undergo the test, only to see that Lancelot had saved Merlin from the griffin's mouth. He never thought that Lancelot could pass the test. Although the methods were a bit straightforward, Arthur was still willing to give him a chance. Of course, there's no need to tell Merlin. Arthur is afraid that Merlin will tell Lancelot his thoughts. If such a thing really happened, it would be pure cheating. This is not what Arthur wants to see. In short, Arthur felt that Merlin had not misjudged anyone this time, so he now needs to understand this Lancelot. If he really qualifies, then Arthur is willing to accept him as a member of the Knights. But this unintentional question suddenly surprised Merlin. That's right, previously it was said that Merlin forged a noble certificate just for Lancelot. Lancelot is handsome, tall and burly, naturally possessing a convincing demeanor. Anyone who sees him fighting can't help but marvel at his bravery and skill in battle. In Merlin's view, if a person with all these excellent qualities cannot become a knight, then no one in this world is qualified to become a knight. But Lancelot only has one problem, which is that he is a commoner. For generations, they have been ordinary farmers, and even among the 8 generations of their ancestors, they have not been associated with the nobility. He is the 5th son of Lord Lazenbia. Although Merlin appeared calm on the surface, he was actually a flustered horse in his heart, because it was all his nonsense. Now he can only pray that Arthur has never heard of this family. Merlin chose to come from Lancelot because he felt that this family was too remote and low-key. I don't know if God heard Merlin's prayer and really let him get by. Oh, it's Lord Lazenbia. Arthur's eyes were confused, but he still pretended to know on the surface. Arthur doesn't want to be looked down upon in front of his friends and attendants. Well, Arthur is a scumbag. This guy's favorite thing from childhood to adulthood is to dance with his sword and play with his gun. Over the years, apart from being decent in court etiquette, he has barely read. How could he possibly remember the coat of arms and family names of all the nobles? Do you know that there are 3 books on the subject of noble coat of arms, each of which is at least as thick as the stone bricks on the city walls? It is not a problem for Arthur to use these books as shields and remember them all. Don't tease me. Although Merlin and Arthur have only been together for a few short months, Merlin still knows his personality well as His Highness, who has a simple and even a bit silly personality. Seeing Arthur's virtue, Merlin also knew that this matter had been fooled over. Since Arthur did not know about the so-called Lazambia family, he naturally would not continue this topic to avoid showing fear, and Merlin naturally did not intend to continue this topic, which happened. So the two of them were very tacit and didn't talk about this topic again. They just tidied up a little before heading to the restaurant. King Uther happened to be free today, so he planned to have a good meal with his son and daughter, so Arthur came back from the knights early today. Walking along the pristine hallway of the royal city, Arthur suddenly noticed that the roses in the garden had already begun to bloom. Upon seeing this scene, Arthur suddenly stood still and turned his head to look at his attendant. "Merlin, what month is it now?" Merlin was a bit unresponsive when Arthur suddenly stopped and almost ran into him. At this moment, Merlin was still thinking about how to help Lancelot. "May. What's wrong? Is there anything special about it?" Merlin knew that his prince was a fool who left his servant and couldn't even wear clothes. Apart from fighting, he was always insensitive to anything else. So it's not surprising that Arthur doesn't know the current year and month. He just wondered why Arthur suddenly cared about this. May. Which means it has been 10 years now. Kai. Arthur murmured to himself without answering Merlin's question. Merlin felt a bit strange when he heard Arthur suddenly spit out a name, which was the first time he had heard of it. Kai. This name is really strange. But just as Merlin was about to ask who Kai was, Arthur suddenly walked forward without saying a word. Merlin suddenly became depressed when she saw Arthur, who had always been full of energy, and her heart suddenly felt a little uneasy. After all, this kind of energetic fool can always find a reason to boost their fighting spirit. Apart from sleeping, this kind of guy can't calm down. Now it's suddenly like this. Is the end of the world coming? At the restaurant, Merlin noticed that the atmosphere today was a bit strange. King Uther, Arthur, and Arthur's sister Princess Morgana all appeared to have a heavy heart. Although King Uther is not an outgoing person and his family doesn't usually have a lively meal, at least he is a family and the atmosphere feels passable, unlike today, when the low pressure in the restaurant would squeeze out water, as if it would rain heavily at any time. Arthur casually picked up the food from the silver plate with cutlery and lowered his head without looking at it. King Uther, holding his beloved golden wine glass, drank it one after another, leaning against his tall backrest and staring blankly ahead without knowing what he was thinking. Princess Morgana, who used to wear a warm smile, also lost her smile. She just stared at the newly opened roses outside the window without saying a word. Seeing the beautiful and kind Morgana like this, Merlin suddenly felt heartbroken. The entire Camelot knew that Morgana was the most beautiful and kind princess in the entire Camelot and even the whole world. Her appearance could make the birds in the sky lose their composure and fall from the sky, leaving the fish in the stream stunned and forgetting how to swim. Her beauty can make the bright moon in the sky hide in the dark clouds, and also make the most beautiful flowers feel ashamed and wither. More importantly, Princess Morgana is known for her kindness, and she is also the only person who dares to advise King Uther, although her advice is generally useless. After all, King Uther is a king who is only stubborn in name. But her kindness is enough to make everyone grateful for her, and her kindness in Camelot cannot be said for 3 days and 3 nights. She is the dream lover of all men and the object of longing for all women. Merlin is no exception. Before, Merlin only lived in a small village and had seen the most beautiful woman. She was only the daughter of a tavern in the east of the village, a little woman with freckles on her face. On the first day of Camelot, when she saw Princess Morgana, Merlin realized that there were truly women in this world who were as beautiful as gods. At that moment, Merlin had forgotten all about the daughter of the tavern at the east end of the village. Princess Morgana became his new dream lover. Seeing her dream lover so depressed and sad, Merlin wished. Merlin was just thinking about it. He was just a servant and had no right to comfort the princess, let alone anything else. As for King Uther and Arthur, Merlin didn't care. King Uther is a cruel king, and Merlin doesn't like him. Arthur is a fool, who would worry about him? After a long time, it was Morgana who spoke first. Father. Really no news from Kai. No news at all. There was a strong sense of luck in the words, and Morgana was hoping her father would give a different answer. This is also the second time Merlin has heard this name today. King Uther lifted his head and looked at his two children. At this moment, Yu's serious and even slightly gloomy expression finally loosened, becoming sad and soft. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but in the end, he shook his head dejectedly. Morgana closed her eyes, tilted her head to the other side, and covered her face with her hand. At this moment, Arthur raised his head and loudly said, "Kai will not be okay. He must have been delayed by something. He is the strongest knight. No one can defeat him. Death is not acceptable." Arthur's eyes were filled with determination. King Uther wanted to comfort his children, but when it came to his mouth, he couldn't speak. Because he is also taking chances, it should be noted that compared to his own children, he is the person who has spent the longest time with Kai. He doesn't know what others think, but he knows that he has always regarded Kai as his own son, even on par with Arthur. But as a king and father, it is necessary for him to let his children know what reality is, so King Uther is very conflicted. Just as King Uther was about to make up his mind, the sound of Camelot's bell suddenly remembered. As the king of Camelot, he could naturally hear the sound of bells above the city walls. This means there is an enemy attack. Chapter 2. Griffin and Warrior. The protagonist still hasn't appeared. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dang. 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 The bell sounded urgently, indicating that the enemy was very strong. Guard. Guard. At this moment, King Uther threw away his previous weakness, his expression as hard as iron, and loudly called out to the royal guards. A group of knights dressed in red overalls immediately rushed in, each holding a weapon. Obviously, the situation was urgent, otherwise no one would have pulled out their weapon at the king's restaurant. Yes, your majesty. What happened outside? King Uther asked calmly. As a king, King Uther will never show any expression that does not conform to the dignity of a king in front of anyone. Several knights clearly didn't know how to explain. King Uther felt very displeased with the hesitation of the knights. Uther's father once taught him a sentence. Don't confuse your subjects. When they ask you for an answer, you must answer without hesitation. Even if that answer is fabricated. King Uther took this statement seriously, and at the same time, he also demanded this from his courtiers. Of course, he did not say that last sentence. But for the king's question, if the courtiers cannot answer in a timely manner, what is the use of asking these courtiers? Lion. Come on. King Uther didn't have time to deal with these guys now, so he asked his most trusted knight Lion to answer the question. Yes, your majesty. The Lion Knight was a typical Celtic, with red hair and beard, slightly curled, and like the king he served, he was a serious and rigid knight. However, at this moment, the knight, who had never hesitated before, spoke a bit hesitantly because he knew how guilty it was to deceive the king. Although he did not believe that the soldiers who reported the news would lie, the problem was that the answer was unrealistic no matter how hard he listened. It's a griffin. Your Majesty. The soldiers saw a griffin flying towards Camelot on the city wall. However, as a knight, the Lion Knight could only answer his own monarch's questions truthfully. King Uther's head swelled when he heard the word griffin. Recently, this monster has caused great damage in the surrounding villages, with at least 50 people being eaten and countless property and livestock lost. King Uther has organized soldiers to fight against it, but the problem is that this animal's body is as hard as iron, and the weapons of knights and soldiers have no effect on it. Instead, it will stimulate the monster's ferocity, causing King Uther to lose many soldiers. What are you waiting for? Let the knights depart. King Uther was too lazy to dwell on the hesitations of the previous knights. If this monster were to enter Camelot, it would be a real disaster. Arthur didn't care about his depression at the moment, so he immediately called out to his little friend Merlin and asked him to prepare armor and weapons for him. He was the commander of the knights, so he didn't have time to sit here idly by. But at that moment, the Lion Knight called out to Arthur with a strange expression on his face. "Wait, Your Highness. What's going on? Is there any bad news?" King Uther was a bit nervous when he was startled by Lion. Recently, the city of Camelot has definitely been plagued by many disasters, and bad news always comes after another bad news. King Uther has been sleeping soundly for so many days, and he has become a bit numb. "No. I'm not sure if this is good news or bad news, I'd rather call it strange news." The Lion Knight is not someone who likes to say witty things, but the news from the soldiers really makes him a bit uncertain. The soldiers reported that the griffin was fighting a person. King Uther was very dissatisfied with today's Lion Knights. He spoke in a confused manner and lacked the rigor and steadiness that knights should have. However, this strange news does not seem bad to King Uther. The previous rampage of the griffin has caused many knights and soldiers to have a fear of war. Now that someone dares to fight this monster, it is definitely exciting news. When King Uther was about to give orders to reward this warrior, the Lion Knight spoke out all the unfinished news. "They are fighting in the air." The words that King Uther was about to say stopped in his throat, and he looked at his knight with a surprised expression. He asked with uncertainty, "In the air?" Merlin, who was playing soy sauce on the side, perked up when she heard these words. After all, being able to fight against griffins in the air is like magic. Merlin has always been very concerned about this aspect. Of course, there is also someone who cares very much. Is it magic or witchcraft? King Uther's slightly cheerful face immediately became solemn. Camelot prohibits all magic and witchcraft, and anyone who dares to associate themselves with magic in Camelot City will be beheaded. There are no exceptions, and there is absolutely no mercy. And all of this began with the laws of King Uther, and the proudest thing of this ironclad monarch's life was that Cameron's laws had never been broken. Anyone who dares to violate the law will face the harshest punishment. This King Uther is particularly attentive to magic, and any slight disturbance can alert this monarch. Upon hearing these words, Arthur and Merlin glanced at each other, with a clear expression of helplessness in their eyes. The Knights of Lion and others are not surprised. After all, the name of the tyrant King Uther was not passed down in a day or two. "I'm not sure, Your Majesty. At least the knights on the city wall haven't seen any traces of magic. These knights of King Uther have killed countless wizards and wizards over the years, and they are still familiar with some traces of magic. That warrior seems to be riding on a griffin in battle. At least the news I received is like this." King Uther breathed a deep sigh of relief. He knew the mysteries of magic and witchcraft best, and if possible, he would never want to be associated with those ghosts again in his lifetime. Later, King Uther became interested in the warrior who dared to fight against the griffin in the air. King Uther and any king of this era have the same flaw, liking warriors. The braver and more powerful the warriors, the more they like them. Let's take a look at the brave warrior who dares to fight against the griffin in the air. As he spoke, he couldn't help but feel curious and walked out first. Arthur and his father are both virtuous and have a strong affection for brave warriors. So he didn't even put on his armor, so he rushed out without paying any attention to Merlin, who was struggling to catch up with the heavy armor behind him. When everyone arrived at the city wall, the knights and soldiers on the wall were not focused on defense, but were whistling and shouting for help one by one. As is well known, King Uther was a strict ruler, and it is not an exaggeration to say that he was a tyrant. So when he saw the chaos on the city wall, his face turned black to carbon. There was no trace of the style of a Camelot warrior. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net. But soon, King Uther had no intention of caring about the disorganized and undisciplined soldiers under his command. Because his mind was completely drawn to the battles above the sky. The sound of eagles singing in the long sky made everyone look up and see a monster 5 meters long rolling and struggling in the air. That is a monster covered in blue and black, with the head of an eagle and the body of a lion. This monster has been very popular lately. Many knights and soldiers have seen it, but every time we meet, the outcome is not very good. So for this monster, not many people will have a good impression. Now that they see someone beating it up, of course they need to cheer, not to mention that this monster's target this time is Camelot. They really don't want to face this monster anymore. It's not that they lack courage, but that they really have no way to deal with this monster with their weapons. How can they fight it? So let's just forget it. Now there is a warrior who can help them deal with this monster, and they think it's great. Even better, this warrior seems to have been dominating. Chapter 3. Kai. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yay! A mournful cry shook everyone's spirits, and that griffin was no longer capable. Although they were refueling before, they didn't actually look at anything. Griffins can fly very well. The battle just now has been happening at a height of 100 meters, and people below can only see a small dot flying in an irregular path in the air, which is not really visible. At most, I saw a humanoid figure constantly wielding a long sword on the body of a griffin, chopping it back and forth. Although I didn't bleed from the monster, I heard the painful scream, and it was obvious that the hero had inflicted considerable damage on this monster. And what's even more exciting is that the monster's just screams were clearly filled with fear and pain. As long as experienced soldiers know, this monster is not working. Sure enough, just after that piercing scream, the rolling little dot in the sky began to grow bigger and they were falling. At this moment, people also saw clearly the figure fighting against the griffin, which was a golden knight. But when everyone saw the armor on the knight's body, the first thought in their hearts was the lion. Because there are too many lion elements on the magnificent golden and silver interwoven knight armor, and the shoulder armor on both sides of the knight has carvings of lion roars. This is also true in front of the knight's breastplate. These lion carvings are so lifelike that with the knight's movements, everyone seems to see the lion roaring in their own eyes. On the knight's body, the blue cloak had been torn into strips of cloth, but a faint pattern of a roaring lion could be seen from the strip, which may be the knight's emblem. Just as everyone's attention was focused on the battle between the knight and the griffin, no one noticed that King Uther's face had changed. His face was both surprised and incredulous, along with an uncontrollable expectation. He certainly can't forget this badge. The lion roar emblem, which he personally bestowed upon his own child. Kai, the child whom he had high hopes for. A new family emblem. Just now, he thought he would never see this emblem again in his lifetime, but he didn't expect that in the next moment, what he thought was impossible would happen in front of him. But King Uther dared not seek confirmation, which was very weak. He wished it didn't fit the personality of King Uther, but he still couldn't speak up and was afraid of disappointment. This may be considered an alternative escape. But he still did it, a bit deceiving himself, but King Uther still chose to be weak. On the other hand, Arthur watched with great interest, admiring both the warrior's bravery and the knight's armor. It's too gorgeous. In Camelot City, a regular set of knight armor also requires a full 200 gold coins, which is equivalent to about 40 cows. But Arthur conservatively estimated that the roaring lion armor on this warrior would cost at least 5,000 gold coins, a price that he felt he could only imagine in his dreams. He believed that his father would not pay such a large sum of money for him. Although King Uther is known as a tyrant, to be honest, his private life is not corrupt. On the contrary, he is very disciplined. He is a very frugal king, treating himself and his son equally. It's impossible for him to pay for such a fancy set of armor for his son. Accompanied by a panicked roar from the griffin, everyone's vision became clearer. It turned out that this warrior, who came from unknown sources, was tying a golden rope around a griffin. It was with this rope that this warrior was able to fight against the griffin in the air. But this also made everyone admire the courage of this warrior even more. He dared to fight a griffin in the sky with just one rope. I really don't know whether to describe him as a skilled person with courage or as too reckless. The rope was tied to one wing and one front paw of the griffin, which greatly restricted its flight and made its movements extremely difficult, giving it a somewhat shaky appearance. It was also because of this that the attack of the griffin was not coherent and the rope was very uncomfortable, which allowed the knight to seize the opportunity to beat the griffin fiercely. As the griffin rapidly descended, everyone watching the play began to exclaim in surprise. They didn't know what would happen to the griffin if it fell so high, but that knight was definitely unlucky. Perhaps the exclamation of the crowd reminded the knight that just as the griffin was about to fall behind the city wall, the knight grabbed the rope and used the struggling power of the griffin to sway and land on its back. Then, with the rope in his hand, he grabbed the griffin's neck and stepped on it with one foot, desperately pulling it back. This pull actually lifted the head of the griffin fiercely. The griffin was suddenly pulled up by this pull, and its body unconsciously pulled up. However, by this time, it was already too close to the ground, and the ropes on its wings were always tightly wrapped. The griffin had no spare force to immediately lift its body into the air. So this person and beast collided directly into a residential building not far from the city wall. In Camelot, all the buildings are made of stone, so this impact can definitely be considered earth-shattering. Fortunately, when the griffin attacked earlier, there was a bell warning, so the residents near the city wall had already fled to the center of the city for refuge, which did not cause any other casualties. The besieging masses on the city wall immediately ran to the inner side of the wall to continue watching the play. Fortunately, King Uther was a ruler who was not dominated by a mentality of eating melons, but made the most correct choice. He drew his long sword from his waist and issued a command pointing in the direction of the griffin's fall. Camelot. Attack. At this moment, the besieging knights and soldiers realized that it was not time to watch a play. Now is the best opportunity to deal with the griffin. The griffin has definitely suffered a lot of damage this time. If it runs away, it will be the ordinary people of Camelot who will suffer in the end. So they immediately rushed down the city wall one by one. Just as they were rushing down the city wall, there was a sudden sound of stones exploding from the collapsed houses, and a huge object broke through the shackles of the ruins and flew out. It's a griffin. It's not dead. However, looking at its messy feathers and hair, blood has already flowed from its forelimbs and head. It's not easy either. Seeing this, soldiers and knights unconsciously quickened their pace. Griffin is a magical creature, different from ordinary beasts. It is very intelligent, and from the moment it wakes up, it knows that it must retreat, otherwise it really can't leave. So at the moment it rushed out of the ruins, it was ready to run away. When it turned around and planned to soar into the sky, a tremendous force came from its throat, wings, and front paws, and the tremendous force directly flipped the griffin to the ground. The rope on its body hasn't been untied yet. Haha, it's so easy to catch you, how could I let you escape? At this moment, a cheerful male voice emerged from the ruins. Now is round 2. It turned out that the knight who was fighting with the griffin was fine, and he still tied the rope in his hand to a large stone pier at some point. This large stone pier was also deeply buried in the ground, quite solid, and there was no risk of the griffin breaking free. The man had just finished speaking when he took off a large axe from his waist and charged towards the griffin. The griffin's reaction was quick. Upon hearing the man's voice, it immediately flipped over and charged its head towards the direction of the man. When it saw the man charging towards it with a battle axe, the griffin immediately faced him with a fierce gaze. It is clear that in order to escape, this man must be dealt with. The griffin is very large, standing at a shoulder height of about 2 meters, and has a strong momentum when charging. The man across from him didn't care at all, but instead accelerated his charge. At the moment when the two were about to make contact, the griffin suddenly stood up and grabbed the man's head with its 2 front claws from a high position. This blow was definitely unexpected. Although the man reacted extremely quickly, he was still hit on the head by the front paw of the griffin. Fortunately, the man's reaction saved his life. At the moment when the front paw of the griffin hit the man's head, he made a backward motion, which did not allow the griffin's claws to grip firmly. This blow only took the man's lion face armor helmet flying, and the knight himself dodged the blow. Although the power of the griffin still caused the man's body to roll out, the next moment the man flipped over and bent over to rush towards the griffin's side. Just as the man rushed to the side of the griffin, his body was like a spring, rising from the ground. At the same time, the battle axe in his hand swung round and fiercely struck the griffin's head. Dang! A huge sound of gold and iron sounded, and apart from the splashing of Mars, the griffin did not suffer any damage on the surface, but the tremendous force still tilted its body. Before the griffin could recover, the man's attacks came one after another. The man didn't even pay attention to the counterattack from the battle axe, and the attack became even more fierce. The movement trajectory of the battle axe in the man's hand was almost indistinct. Dang 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 dang. The continuous 7 combos all hit the head of the griffin, and they were all in the same position. When the attack stopped, the huge body of the griffin fell to the ground like a fallen tree and never stood up again. At this moment, King Uther finally arrived with his people. The man then turned around and looked at the crowd. When he saw King Uther charging at the front, the man showed a big smile. When King Uther saw this man, he was completely stunned, his eyes full of disbelief. The man didn't care about the king's days, but naturally placed his battle axe on the ground, left hand on the upper joint of his right arm, knelt down on one knee, and lowered his head, saying, "Salute to you, my king." Arthur was a few steps late because he wanted to help Merlin, who was dragging her back. When he arrived, he happened to see this scene. Chapter 4. Usher's Adopted Son. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing someone call him by his name, Kai raised his head. Although it was quite impolite to look up without receiving a response from the king, Kai and King Uther were too familiar, so he didn't care about it at all. Anyway, he was certain that King Uther would not punish him for such a small matter, even though he had always been known as a tyrant. Arthur. Kai saw a big boy with blonde hair in front of him and said with some uncertainty. After all, when he left, Arthur was only 8 or 9 years old, and 10 years was enough to completely transform a person. It's really you. Kai. Arthur didn't care about so much. After confirming that the person in front of him was his brother, Arthur completely disregarded royal etiquette and rushed over, hugging Kai, who stood up. It's really you. My brother. I knew it, you wouldn't break your promise. You really came back. You really came back. Kai, who stood up, reluctantly caught his reckless younger brother. Despite being such a big person, he still likes to jump on others and doesn't know where to learn from. However, after hearing Arthur's excited words, Kai also put away his helpless expression and smiled, hugging Arthur and patting him hard on the back. Of course. Knights never break their promises. After hugging for a while, Kai put Arthur down. Arthur also noticed something was wrong at this moment. Embracing was not a problem, but he jumped onto someone else's body, which was a bit unattractive. Anyway, Arthur was also a qualified knight, no longer a child. After letting go of Arthur, Kai smiled and walked towards King Uther on the side. Although King Uther was also very excited, it was better to kill him if he wanted him to be less dignified like Arthur. Of course, Kai knew about King Uther's habit of saving face, so he decided to take the initiative to say hello. Kai walked up to King Uther and hugged him, then patted him and whispered, "I'm back, Uther." At this moment, King Uther trembled a bit and extended his hand, gently stroking Kai's hair. His voice was slightly excited and he said, "It's good to come back, it's good to come back." The crowd began to whisper in the face of this change. Some people who are unclear about the situation are privately asking what exactly is going on. Merlin was one of them. He secretly pulled the arm of the Knight of Lion and asked, "What the hell is going on? Who is this Kai?" Lion saw that Merlin was pulling him, so he explained in a low voice, that was the adopted son of King Uther, the third son of Sir Eckhart and Sir Kay, known as the Lion Knight. He left Camelot 10 years ago and said he wanted to travel around the world. "I didn't expect to come back today." Because the occasion was not appropriate, Lion did not elaborate, only briefly explained. "This is also Merlin." If there were other servants, Lion would have wasted his saliva. Merlin is very special in Camelot. Although he is a servant, his status is not inferior. Firstly, he was an apprentice to the palace pharmacist Gaius. In Camelot, Gaius had a high reputation. This knowledgeable pharmacist not only had outstanding medical skills, but also served as an important advisor to the king, thus holding a high position. Secondly, Merlin is still the prince's attendant. In the palace, the development potential of such positions as attendants is great. After all, he is the closest person to the prince. Although Merlin is a commoner, it may not be certain when Arthur ascends the throne. Moreover, Arthur and Merlin have a very good personal relationship, which can be seen from Arthur carrying him everywhere. At least Lion wouldn't treat him as an ordinary servant. Merlin also understood that the Lion Knight could not have said too much to him at this time, but at least someone else told him the key news. Anyway, all you need to know is that this knight named Kai is extremely close to the Uther family. However, Merlin was also a bit strange as to why Arthur had never told him about this Kai before. King Uther is not a king who likes warmth. On the contrary, this rigid and stubborn middle-aged man is not used to expressing his emotions. So after a brief period of warmth, King Uther immediately suppressed his excitement. He coughed a few times and pointed to the already unconscious griffin, giving orders to the others, "Kill this monster." After giving the order, King Uther grabbed Kai's hand and planned to bring his adopted son back to the palace. "Wait. Don't kill it, I finally caught it." Kai quickly stopped the soldier's movements. "My king, this is my prey, and I have the right to dispose of it." Upon hearing Kai's cry, almost everyone stared blankly at the warrior. The warriors here are not only because Kai dared to fight against the griffin, but also because he defeated it, and more importantly, because he dared to openly oppose King Uther's orders. In Camelot, there are fewer brave warriors who dare to do this than those who dare to fight griffins. But surprisingly, King Uther did not order punishment for the person who dared to oppose him as usual. Instead, he asked with a puzzled expression, "This is a monster. What do you want it to do?" "It's too dangerous, Kai. The best way to deal with these monsters is to kill them." The attitude of King Uther surprised everyone, including Merlin, and this was not the Uther they had in mind. Especially Merlin, as a wizard, he was actually very disgusted and even hated the attitude of King Uther towards magic. Those who were executed for magic were all his kind in Merlin's eyes, many of whom did not do evil, but were also sent to the guillotine by King Uther. King Uther, who had always been tough and cold, became rarely more reasonable when facing Kai. In Merlin's impression, even Arthur could not disobey King Uther's orders, let alone oppose King Uther's orders in front of everyone. "I need a mount, my horse is for this guy to eat. This guy has caused me to walk for 5 days and 5 nights, and... Kai pointed to his armor. I feel like there's nothing else I can carry besides this. Only then did King Uther have the thought to carefully examine Kai's armor. This set of armor is very magnificent, with exquisite patterns and some unknown runes everywhere. King Uther does not believe that any craftsman on the British Isles could forge this kind of carving and forging technique. Of course, the thickness of the armor also made King Uther very concerned, which far exceeded the average knight's armor. So King Uther also believed Kai's words. This set of equipment weighed at least 300 to 400 pounds, and ordinary horses could not carry knights wearing this armor. Chapter 5. Banquets. You are listening at novelfull.audio. King Uther did not reject such unreasonable requests as usual. He was contemplating the consequences of agreeing to Kai. Faced with this child who has been away from home for a full 10 years, King Uther does not emotionally want to refuse the child's first request after returning. King Arthur is a king, and as a king, he often cannot be emotional. The magic ban was a law that King Uther had upheld for over a decade, and it was also the most persistent measure in his lifetime. He cannot and does not want to break this ban. It's easy to agree to Kai's request, but what about afterwards? Does the griffin belong to the category of magic bans? Without a doubt, Griffin is a non-natural creature, it is a magical creature. Owning and domesticating a griffin is undoubtedly a violation of the ban. If King Uther boldly sheltered Kai and adopted this griffin, it would be equivalent to King Uther breaking his own ban with his own hands. If this thing really happens, then the authority of the law will become worthless and eventually become nothing but a piece of paper. This is not what King Uther wants. He is well aware of the horror of magic and will not allow the disasters caused by magic to happen again in his own country. Therefore, even if it is a request from his favorite child, King Uther can only refuse. No way. The law is law. King Uther emphasized his tone on the last word, knowing that his K was a sensible child and he could understand his responsibility as a king. As he said, the law is law, and the law is the law. If the law could be trampled upon at will, it would have been better not to establish this law in the first place. After all, as a ruler who openly violates the law while having the law, the weak foundation of the king's rule. Law is order, and order is the foundation of governance. As a qualified king, King Uther understands this truth very well. Kai glanced at the resolute gaze of King Uther, and finally had no choice but to compromise. There's no way, King Uther is Kai's family, and Kai cherishes his family very much, both in this life and in the past. He can't really fight his family for a beast. Okay, but he is my prey and I must kill him. Kai said solemnly. After all, this is a considerable amount of experience, and Kai cannot waste it. Upon hearing Kai's compromise, King Uther felt heartfelt gratification. Kai was indeed the same Kai, always so sensible. So of course, King Uther would not refuse such a reasonable request, even though he personally felt it was unnecessary. The honor of defeating the griffin is already Kai's, and no one can deny it. As for the matter of repairing the sword, it's really not worth mentioning, and it's bloody. But since Kai persisted, King Uther did not stop him. Quickly, Kai used his battle axe to chop off the head of the griffin like a lumberjack. During this time, the griffin woke up once, but was soon knocked unconscious again by Kai's battle axe on the forehead. Since then, it has never woken up again. After about 10 minutes of effort, the griffin's head was finally chopped off. Although the incision was very poor and somewhat affected the aesthetics, no one cares about it now. Everyone cheers for the warrior who killed the griffin. In the evening, a grand banquet is being held in the banquet hall of the palace. However, unlike typical welcome banquets, there is no cheerful music, no rude urging of knights to drink, and even a long table far away is empty. But the atmosphere in the banquet hall was excellent, not at all desolate. Everyone gathered at a long table close to the throne, and even the servants serving in the banquet hall unconsciously left their jobs and desperately joined that circle. That day was a blizzard, and it was hard to see anything 5 meters away outside during the day. Even in cold weather, people's noses would freeze. The evil frost giants took advantage of this opportunity to launch an attack on the city of the Asgards. Each of those terrifying creatures was 13 feet tall and covered in thick ice armor, and ordinary weapons could not harm them. Among everyone, Sir Kai was vividly recounting his adventure experiences. In this era, the area of human activity was very small, taking the Celtic countries on the British Isles as an example. The Celts mainly lived in the southern part of England near Ireland in the future, and the areas further north were all primitive forests. In these primitive forests, there are countless ferocious beasts and some supernatural creatures constantly threatening people's safety, so at this time, the world in people's eyes will definitely not exceed 50 kilometers, or even smaller. At least in this hall, there are only a few knights who have slightly more knowledge, but it is only limited to the Celtic countries, and they have no knowledge of further places. But Kai was different. He spent 10 years starting from Camelot and heading eastward, first arriving in later Norway. UU reading www.uukangshu.net is not yet the home of the Vikings, but there lives a group of highly civilized people who call themselves Asgards. Kai lived in Asgard for almost a year, then crossed the European plain, which was still a primitive and uncivilized region, to the warm Mediterranean region. Here, Kai encountered a civilization called Olympus and witnessed the civilized world under the command of Olympus. There he first learned that there was indeed a kingdom called Atlantis in the ancient Mediterranean region. You should know that in Kai's impression, Atlantis has always been a legend, even a legend that has been proven to be fabricated, and in the legend, Atlantis is in the Atlantic, not the Mediterranean. In short, after traveling in ancient Greece, Kai continued to move eastward and later encountered an emerging civilization in the area known as the Two-River Basin, which they called the Sumerians. Afterwards, he also encountered an invasion with these Missouri people. A group of people from the Western Desert Civilization, led by a superhuman named Sun God La, went to the east and engaged in a long-lasting war with the Missouri people. This war alone lasted for 3 years, and in the end, both sides chose to sign a contract due to heavy casualties. They made an agreement, one being a Western ruler and the other being an Eastern ruler. After experiencing this prehistoric battle for supremacy, Kai had originally planned to continue heading east back to his haunted land of the east, but reality gave Kai a few big mouths. The road to the east was too dangerous. He and his friends in Missile narrowly escaped death several times, but still couldn't find their way home, and even lost a close friend for it. Feeling heartbroken, Kai had no choice but to retreat. Chapter 6. Gifts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Are those frost giants real? After talking for almost an hour, Kai finally stopped and prepared to drink something to moisten his throat. Kai just stopped here, and Morgana, who had been by Kai's side, quickly handed the poured glass to Kai's hand. But just as Kai was drinking, Arthur immediately seized the opportunity to ask questions. Arthur. Kai has just returned and needs to rest. You can't keep pestering him asking questions. But before Kai could speak, Morgana beside her became unhappy. She couldn't wait for Kai to come back, but before she could say a few words to herself, these guys pulled Kai around and asked him questions, without leaving her any time. Although Arthur did not want to be lectured by his sister Princess Morgana, after all, Morgana had a point. Originally, this was a welcome banquet prepared for Kai, but they were pulling Kai's story all the time, which was really impolite. Kai didn't really care about it. He hadn't seen Arthur and the others for 10 years, and he really wanted to talk to them. It's okay, I'm not tired. After saying that, he patted Morgana's hand, indicating that it was okay. Morgana blushed a bit when Sora made this move, while Arthur beside him paid no attention to Morgana's changes. He only knew that Kai said it was okay, so he could continue asking. The so-called straight man roughly refers to this kind of idiot without emotional intelligence. Kai saw Arthur's thirst for knowledge spurting out, and he didn't talk nonsense. Instead, he directly instructed the servants beside him to bring his things up. This time, Kai had prepared many gifts for his return. Not long after, a group of servants came in carrying small packages, and even a few servants pushed in a few small cars. Seeing so many things brought in by the servants, the crowd who had been drinking during Kai's break was attracted again. Many people know that Kai brought back a lot of things, but no one knows exactly what those things are. People have curiosity, and knowing that Kai has returned from traveling the world, they naturally wonder what strange things Kai has brought back. Kai asked two servants to lift up a huge square package and then asked Arthur to open it. Arthur rushed over impatiently, and Merlin, who had been by Arthur's side, naturally didn't want to be left behind. In the past, Merlin believed that the world of magic was already bizarre enough, and he felt a little proud of it. But today he realizes how vast the outside world is. What I know is simply not worth mentioning. So now he really wants to understand the outside world. After all, if it were his fate, perhaps he would never be able to leave Camelot in his lifetime. With Merlin, Arthur naturally didn't need to pick up and untie the cloth outside the package himself. And Merlin is also willing to serve. Merlin untied the package with a few strokes, only to find that it contained a square iron box with extremely exquisite workmanship, which was not ordinary at first glance. Merlin looked at Arthur and he nodded, so Merlin forcefully opened the lid of the iron box. But when she saw clearly what was inside the iron box, poor Merlin was so scared that she suddenly threw off the lid of the iron box. Ah! Merlin's scream was definitely comparable to a soprano, with a strong penetrating power that startled others as well. Arthur was much calmer, although his face was also scared and he retreated repeatedly, but he didn't make any awkward noises. What is this? Arthur pointed pale at the inside of the iron box and asked in a trembling voice. Others were also curious about the performance of these two people, especially King Uther. He was a bit angry at Arthur's timidity, and had always had high hopes for him to become a better king than himself. However, Arthur's current performance was definitely not outstanding, and he was not even qualified enough. So King Uther stood up first and walked to the side of the box, intending to see what was inside. As he approached, he was also startled, but he was much stronger than Arthur. At least on the surface, this king could maintain his usual appearance. But his next words still exposed his emotions. What the hell is this? It's rare that King Uther used foul language. Kai saw their expressions, but he was very happy because when he first saw this thing, it wasn't much better, and he was mocked by those Asgard men for a long time. This is the frost giant, Kai said with a smile, and before anyone could ask, he continued, yes, it's the frost giant I'm talking about. The head inside is the previous frost giant King Níl, whom I and Asgard King Bli killed together. It turned out that there was a huge, hideous-looking head lying quietly in the iron box. The skin of the head was blue-gray, and there were many ice prisms on it. It looks like there are many ice horns growing on the head of a giant. At the same time, a white chill continued to emanate from the iron box, causing the temperature in the hall to drop significantly in an instant. Speaking of the origin of this head, Kai also showed a nostalgic expression. The last time Kai returned to Asgard in the Nordic region, Bree was not in Asgard. It seemed that Yu had gone to another country, and Kai didn't inquire in detail. Anyway, Bree hadn't returned for several months, so Kai didn't wait any longer. That was really a fierce battle. We fought against the frost giants led by Níl on the walls of Asgard for 10 days and 10 nights, and finally defeated them. Then, Bli and I chased Níl along the way, and after 10 days and 10 nights, we finally caught up with Níl in the frost giants' kingdom of Jotunheim. Finally, we killed this monster on the ice field of Jotunheim. In that battle, I was almost killed. If it weren't for Bree's son Bauer's desperate efforts to bring me and Bree back from Jotunheim, We might have stayed in that world of only ice and snow. Although Kai did not describe the battle in detail, everyone could imagine the intense situation at that time. It was also because of Kai's explanation that others put aside their initial fear. After all, even if this head was terrifying, it was just a dead object. Fear comes from the unknown, and since we know its origin, it will naturally ease a lot. Only Merlin was different from the others, and his fear became even more profound. Because he can feel strong magical fluctuations from that head, which means that the owner of this head must have had extremely strong magical abilities during his lifetime. Merlin had seen such a powerful magical creature for the first time, and even such a powerful magical creature had been killed by Kai. He felt that if he were exposed, he would die even more decisively. Upon hearing the origin of this head, King Uther breathed a sigh of relief. "Well done, Kai. But why did you keep this head?" The Celtics are one of the most civilized ethnic groups in the world today, and they don't have the habit of keeping enemy heads, which is a tradition of barbarians. Upon hearing King Uther's question, Kai grinned and said, "Cool down." Chapter 7. Gifts, continued. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The main purpose of keeping the head of the Frost Giant King is to use it as a refrigerator. Although placing food next to a hideous head tests one's ability to bear it, after adapting, it actually feels okay, even a bit dark gothic. If you are interested in this style, you can even sleep with the head of Frost Giant King and call it in the air. Kai's explanation made everyone shudder, but they also felt that it was a good idea. After all, everyone knows that lower temperatures are more conducive to food preservation. "Father, I think we can put this thing in our storage room." Arthur's heart grew stronger at this moment. After overcoming the most open fear, the boy immediately enthusiastically took out the head of the frost giant and suggested to his father. King Uther looked at his son, who was always lacking in heart and soul, with a grim face and gritted his teeth, saying, "Don't even think about it." Kai happily watched the interaction between Arthur and his son. Despite being away for so many years, he actually missed the atmosphere of home. Although it was exciting outside, there was always a lack of such warmth. "All right, Arthur, put that thing down. I was just joking, it was my spoils of war and a witness to our friendship with King Bligh. It's impossible for you to actually put it in the kitchen." Kai took the head from Arthur's hand and put it in the box again, ending the struggle between these two fathers and sons. Then Kai took out several boxes from a pile of packages, and he was the first to take out a long box and deliver it to Arthur. "This is your gift." Kai is Arthur's brother. He watched Arthur grow up from a young age, so when facing Kai, Arthur never knew what politeness was. In a hurry, he opened the long box and took out the things inside. That is a long sword, with a total length of about 1.4 meters. The hilt has been lengthened and the body is about 9 centimeters. It is not much different from an ordinary knight's long sword, but it is different from a typical steel-made long sword. The overall appearance of this sword is a dark gold color, with a simple and atmospheric shape. The sword is shaped with 2 giant dragons arched around the body, which is very in line with Arthur's identity. The family emblem of King Arthur is a red dragon. Arthur received the strictest knightly education from a young age, and his knowledge of weapons even exceeded that of his own clothes. So when he got that sword, Arthur knew it was definitely a sharp weapon. "This is a long sword that I specifically crafted for you by a dwarf forging master in Asgard. Its material is the hardest and most mysterious metal from under the ice sheets of the north, and I have spent almost all of my savings for it. So use it well, Arthur." In fact, the forging of this sword is even more difficult than what Kai said. The main material of this sword is called Jingjin. When Kai first heard this name, he almost thought that the dwarf had also traveled through time like himself. After all, although Kai didn't read novels much in his previous life, he also read a few Western fantasy novels while reading, knowing that Jingjin was completely fabricated, a metal fantasy. But as he learned more, Kai realized that he had misunderstood. Although both are called refined gold, this rare metal is completely different from the kind of refined gold that Kaishang I saw in his novels. This magical metal called Jingjin is very light in weight, not even a quarter as heavy as the same body of iron, which is completely different from Jingjin in novels. But its hardness and cutting ability are exactly the same as those described in the novel. Even the rarity level is even higher than before, otherwise Kai would have been kind to the dwarves, and the greedy dwarves would not have taken this thing out. But even so, Arthur's long sword is not entirely made of fine gold, it is also mixed with some other metals. However, the forging skills of the Nordic dwarves have completely surpassed this era, and their alloy technology is very strong, which leads to the quality of this long sword being quite superb, and has not insulted the refined gold. Originally, the dwarves and King Bligh were preparing to enchant this sword, but Kai considered King Uther's attitude towards magic and ultimately refused their offer. This long sword, although sharp and hard, has no magical effect. Arthur played with the long sword that Kai gave him and loved it very much. He waved it twice and found that the center of gravity and structure of the sword were simply perfect, without any bitterness, extremely effortless. Holding it in his hand, he liked it more and more as he looked, but accidentally the front end of his sword swept over the wine pot and glass next to him. At this time, the Celtics did not have high-end porcelain, they mostly used pottery, while the palace used metal products, such as the favorite wine glass of King Uther, which was made of pure gold. But after Arthur's long sword touched the wine pot and wine glass, the sword passed through them without any obstacles, as if the sword had not touched anything at all. After about 5 seconds, the few wine pots and glasses slowly split in half. No, they should have slipped into two. The upper part of the cut wine pot and glass slid down silently, causing the wine inside to splash all over the ground. The cut was even smoother without any burrs. Everyone took a cold breath. They never thought there would be such a sharp weapon. Then all the men present fervently looked at the long sword in Arthur's hand. After all, they are all knights, and there is no knight who does not love divine weapons. In their eyes, Arthur's long sword in his hand was comparable to a divine artifact in Celtic mythology. Arthur also took a cold breath. This thing is really sharp. For a moment, Arthur was afraid that this long sword would also cut him. Kai didn't take this for granted. He patted Arthur's shoulder and said, "We must make good use of this weapon in the future. Does this sword have a name?" Arthur snapped back and asked urgently. "Excalibur, his name," swore the sword of victory, Kai said with a hint of malice, then ignored Arthur. But turned his gaze to King Uther. At this moment, King Uther also had expectations. He was not originally interested in Kai's gift, and even did not agree with Kai's 10-year journey around the world. He believes that it is too ambitious, and true men should take responsibility for themselves, rather than pursuing those elusive things. But Kai's gift to Arthur surprised him. Like all knights, no, it should be like all men, King Uther has no resistance to this divine weapon. Unfortunately, Kai did not have the habit of giving gifts repeatedly, let alone the good health of refined gold. Kai had no place to look for more. The gift Kai gave to King Uther this time is a certain crown. A magnificent crown to the extreme, and more importantly, this crown is entirely composed of coral and pearls. This crown is called the Fisherman's Crown, which was a gift given to me by the king of the Fisherman's Kingdom of Atlantis during my travels in Atlantis. Although the name may not sound pleasant, this crown is the most precious treasure of the Fisherman's Kingdom. It is a crown naturally formed from coral and has not undergone any polishing. The Atlanteans only placed a few golden pearls on it. Upon hearing Kai's explanation, King Uther's face immediately became extremely satisfied. In fact, when Kai took out this crown, he was already extremely satisfied. Although not a divine weapon, the coral crown is definitely enough to surprise him inexplicably. The navigation skills of the Celts were not very good, otherwise they would not only roam around England, which also led to coral and pearls being extremely rare in the Celtic countries, making them even rarer and more precious treasures than gold and gemstones. In the eyes of other kings, if some coral fragments could be embedded above the crown, it would be enough to satisfy them. If a pearl were embedded, it would attract the envy of all kings. And what about the crown that Kai gave him? The whole body is composed of the most beautiful red coral, which is naturally formed, and the slightly golden pearls on top are even more valuable. King Uther even suspected that if he were willing to sell this crown, there might be a king willing to exchange his own royal city. With this crown, King Uther can freely declare the wealth and strength of Camelot to everyone. This temptation is absolutely irresistible to a king. Finally, Kai turned his gaze to Morgana standing beside him. From the beginning, Morgana always wore a proud smile as she watched Kai with great energy, leaving everyone amazed. It wasn't until Kai turned her gaze to herself that Morgana regained her composure, and her face was immediately flushed. Kai stepped forward and grabbed Morgana's hand, giving the girl a headshot. "And our Morgana, how could I possibly forget my cutest sister?" Kai said as he held Morgana's hand and approached a pile of boxes. Pointing to these boxes, he said, "This is all yours, my lovely Princess Morgana." Then, with excitement, the servants quickly opened the boxes. After laying the groundwork for the previous two gifts, no one would think that Sir Kay's gift to Princess Morgana would be ordinary. As a result, this opening is amazing. Everyone was blinded by what was inside. Gold jewelry full of exotic charm, jewelry, artworks, and mysterious silk. But the most eye-catching among them was a set of women's armor and a pair of slightly shorter knight swords. All of these things radiate the radiance of wealth. Even the knowledgeable King Usher thought he had come to his treasury. Morgana suddenly felt a bit at a loss when she saw these things. She certainly likes the gifts Kai gave her, but these gifts are too expensive. She is so valuable that she doesn't even know how to deal with it. King Uther is a frugal king. Although he has good face, he is actually not extravagant in private. As the adopted daughter of King Uther, although Morgana never lacked anything, she had never seen so much wealth. "What's wrong? My lovely Miss Morgana, are you going to reject your Kai?" "That's so sad," Kai pretended to say. Chapter 8. Past and Present Lives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Finally, with the encouragement of King Uther, Morgana accepted Kai's gift, but immediately couldn't bear the gaze of others and shyly hid in her own room. Seeing the posture of Morgana's youngest daughter, Uther Wong also showed a satisfied smile of comfort. Morgana likes Kai, which is almost well known to older people. And now that Kai has given Morgana so many valuable gifts in front of so many people, everyone knows what it means. King Uther was even more pleased to see it succeed. Although Morgana was said to be his adopted daughter, in reality, Morgana was his biological daughter. Only 3 people in the entire kingdom know this, one is himself, the other is the royal pharmacist Gaius, and finally Kai. This involves a series of dog blood stories, and King Uther does not want others to know. Gaius knew because he was a close friend of King Uther. And Kai learned the secret through an accident. So for King Uther, he always had a guilty heart towards Morgana. He hopes that Morgana can live a good life. Marrying Kai is undoubtedly the best choice. Although Kai may be a bit naive, in addition to this, King Uther has to admit that Kai is the most outstanding young man he has ever seen in his life. Moreover, Kai knows the root and the bottom. Kai grew up with him from a young age, and the amount of time he spent with him exceeded that of Kai's own biological father. King Uther understood Kai, and he knew better that Kai could definitely bring happiness to Morgana. The dinner ended in a sea of amazement and cheers, and this day may leave a significant mark in Cameron's history. What happened today will definitely be repeated with relish by everyone. However, although all the guests were having a great time, Kai's mood was not good. He stood alone on the high terrace of the palace castle, quietly watching the dimly lit city. Suddenly, there was an unprecedented sense of disappointment. Kai has a secret that no one knows. He is a traveler. His original name is no longer important, especially after his journey home was completely cut off. Kai's real name is really not important in this world. He was a police officer in his past life and served in the military. Although his performance in the army was not considered a king of soldiers, he could definitely be considered an excellent soldier for the people. Later, due to some reasons, he was forced to retire and switch careers, and then became a criminal police officer in his hometown city. His experience as a reconnaissance soldier made his police career relatively successful. Although I haven't caught any ruthless characters like murderers or high IQ criminals, after all, his city can only be considered a third-tier city and he doesn't have as many exciting experiences. But he has also successfully cracked many cases and arrested many suspects, and he thinks he deserves the badge on his head. His journey through time has nothing to say, it was just a sudden arrest and sacrifice. His only consolation was that only he was sacrificed in that pursuit. Other colleagues are fine. Although he was not an orphan in his past life, his parents were long gone and he had no wife or children. Although he had made a few girlfriends, most of them broke up due to work reasons. A typical lonely family with nothing to worry about even after death. Other colleagues are different, either young or with children and women. And that time it was his command, he didn't want his mistake to cause others to pay the price. In short, after waking up, he traveled through time, not in that kind of clothing, but as soon as he woke up, he became a baby. Afterwards, he grew up in Camelot, and his biological parents also loved him very much. It was not because of any bloody plot that he stayed in Camelot. It is entirely based on the rules of the nobility. Kai is the third son and the youngest in the family, without any inheritance rights. There is not enough wealth at home to support the 3 children. The provision here is not to say that he cannot afford it. His family has been aristocratic for generations, and he is not lacking a bite to eat. The so-called provision here is something that happens after reaching adulthood. Kai's elder brother is the eldest son and the most legitimate heir, and the family's territory belongs to him. His second brother is also much older than Kai. Although he does not have inheritance rights, his parents have already figured out a way out for him. He will inherit a small piece of land that his mother married him to, and the family will also divide a small part of the land, allowing him to become a territory knight and continue to serve the family. But when it comes to Kai, there is a bit of a problem. Although Kai's family has a long history, it is not a big aristocrat, and the family cannot continue to disperse the territory, which will threaten the existence of the family. This is a difficult problem that all small aristocrats in this era need to face. With more children, there must be some choices. It is impossible to treat everyone equally, as it is irresponsible to the family. After all, a knightly title is not so easy to obtain. A knight must be a nobleman, and there is nothing to say about it. Secondly, it is necessary to have property. In this era, people believe more in property, and those proletarian knights give the impression of lack of loyalty, lack of ability, and even hooliganism. In short, the title of wandering knight is not a pleasant one. And, having property, is not just a matter of a few acres of land per room, it is true territory. This territory is either granted by the king or inherited by the family, with no third option. But it's too difficult for the king to enfeoff. After all, it is difficult for a commoner or a penniless knight to gain the trust and appreciation of a king, and this is a dead cycle. So family inheritance became mainstream. So Kai's future became a problem. Fortunately, Kai's father had a way out. Kai's father, Sir Eckert, was a close friend of King Uther and had grown up naked since childhood. In short, because of his good relationship with the king, Sir Eckert took the king's path and sent his third son to the king, becoming a royal attendant. This is also the best way for nobles to find opportunities for children in their families who do not have inheritance rights, but generally speaking, they must have a close relationship with the royal family. Also, due to his father's relationship, Kai grew up in the palace from a young age, and King Uther also loved his house and his daughter. He did not treat Kai like other attendants, but genuinely treated Kai as his own child. Even in the end, he simply announced that Kai would become his adopted son. Yu reading www.yuukeungshu.net. Although there is a reason why the queen loves Kai, the notorious stubborn and rigid King Uther was able to make this decision out of sincerity. In this era, an adopted son is not something that can be easily recognized. Legally, an adopted son also has the right to inheritance. Although the inheritance rights were relatively lower, he was also a potential heir to the king, especially at that time when King Uther did not have any biological descendants. At that time, almost everyone was against the decision of King Uther, even Sir Hector, Kai's biological father. If King Uther never has children, or if he suddenly dies on the battlefield, the royal family will have to switch bloodlines, and this involves too much. Moreover, some people in the city of Camelot at that time already knew that the queen was no longer fertile. This is simply making Kai the heir directly. In those years, both the queen and King Uther faced immense pressure, and it wasn't until Arthur was born that everything calmed down. Kai grew up safely in the city of Camelot like this. After all, he is a traveler, and the knowledge, experience, and golden fingers brought by his past life have made Kai perform exceptionally well. This makes King Uther extremely proud, believing that he made the right decision to adopt Kai as his adopted son. And Kai did not disappoint King Uther. He had just reached adulthood and defeated knights from various countries in the kingdom's knight competition, becoming the champion knight. King Uther was not stingy either, and when Kai became a champion knight at the age of 18, he was knighted. However, Kai then made a decision that made King Uther extremely angry. He decided to hand over his territory to the king for management, and then embarked on a journey around the world alone. This puzzled everyone at the time, as they couldn't figure out why Kai had made such an unwise decision. Only Kai himself knows that he wants to go home. Chapter 9. The Golden Finger and Going Home. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chinese people pay attention to the death of foxes and the return of leaves to their roots. Kai was also born in a more traditional family during his first life. He values this very much. Just like before, he would go back to his hometown in any way for the spring festival every year. Even though he has no relatives in his hometown, if he doesn't do this, he will always feel a little less. After coming into this world, the same goes for him. He is an adult with a complete set of values, so even though his parents and loved ones treat Kai very well, Kai is not a real child after all, and he always feels a bit distant from them. He is afraid that if he truly accepts his loved ones in this life, he will forget his family and friends in another world. Although he was not sure if such a thing would really happen, there was always such a thorn in his heart. Especially when Kai's golden finger awakens, his desire to go home becomes stronger and stronger. Speaking of the golden finger, Kai didn't know where it came from. Anyway, when he was 10 years old and first hunted with King Uther, he killed a half-year-old wild boar independently, and his golden finger awakened. Kai's ability is very special, even a bit evil. At the beginning, Kai even had a strong aversion to it. Kai's ability is very simple, it's just killing experience, and Kai is not sure if his description is accurate. But after he killed the wild boar, he could feel a surge of energy pouring into his body from the boar. This energy makes Kai's strength greater, his body more sensitive, his mind clearer, his thinking more flexible, and his memory stronger. At the same time, in my mind, there are also many attribute panels that are common in online games. The panel is very simple, with only a few lines of text. There are 3 attributes: strength, agility, and spirit. And an energy bar. Those 3 attributes are easy to understand, and those who have played some online games or even read some novels can understand them. What really scares Kai is that energy bar. Every time Kai kills a creature, the energy bar will grow a bit. When the energy bar is full, Kai will receive a point that can be added to 3 attributes. Moreover, Kai's ability targets different objects and the amount of energy he can seize varies. Generally speaking, the rules it follows are related to two things. One is the intelligence of the target that Kai kills. The higher the intelligence, the more energy Kai can plunder. So humans became one of Kai's best prey. The second type is strength. Whether it is an animal, monster, or human, the stronger the strength, the more energy can be plundered. At the same time, this ability will also plunder the ability of the killed object. However, it depends on the probability. It's a bit like a skill book for defeating monsters and exploding equipment. Generally speaking, the probability is very low, and many abilities are not useful for Kai, and he can't even learn them at all. Kai can choose some of these abilities as his own and use energy points to enhance them. This golden finger initially gave Kai a very bad feeling because none of these abilities encouraged him to kill. But soon Kai adjusted his mentality. He used to be a soldier and later worked as a police officer, with absolutely excellent psychological qualities. He quickly realized that this golden finger, to put it simply, was actually a weapon. Weapons are never scary, they have no good or evil, and only those who use them are scary. Kai's previous life experience gave him enough confidence to use this weapon reasonably. After adjusting his mindset, Kai began to view his abilities more calmly, and then he saw hope for returning home from this ability. With this golden finger, it means he has the capital to go home. So he has been planning to go home since he was 13 years old. Firstly, magic and witchcraft were his first choice. After all, no matter how he looked at it, his time traveling was definitely a supernatural event, so using supernatural powers to solve it was undoubtedly the best way. Unfortunately, King Uther began to vigorously combat witchcraft and magic since Arthur's birth, leading to their extinction in Camelot. Even if Kai wanted to learn, he had nowhere to go. So Kai had to change his plan, he had to leave Camelot. He worked hard to train and strengthen his abilities in preparation for leaving Camelot. Finally, at the age of 18, he defeated knights from various countries in the knights competition and became the champion knight. He proved his ability, and then at the enfeoffment ceremony, he made a request to travel. Although King Uther was very reluctant to let Kai down and forced him to ban his feet. But Kai was really like King Uther in some way, at least they were stubborn. Finally, one night, Kai, who was banned by King Uther, left a book and ran away. In the letter left behind, Kai did not mention that he wanted to go home, but rather that he wanted to travel around the world and comfortingly stayed for 10 years. Kai believed that 10 years should be enough to find the answer for himself. If he could go back, then this 10-year agreement would only be a comfort, allowing King Uther and his companions time to accept the fact that he would never come back. If you can't go back. In short, 10 years is definitely enough. Afterwards, Kai traveled around the world for 10 years. During these 10 years, Kai has traveled around the world. This is not very accurate. Kai's footsteps have not yet traveled that far, and he has only traveled in Europe, Asia Minor, and North Africa in the past decade. But in these places, Kai encountered many people and things, many of which were bizarre. It was also these experiences that dealt Kai a very significant blow. He is certain that the world he is currently in is not the same as the original world. For example, in Northern Europe, he met the Asgard people. At first, Kai didn't pay much attention until he circled around Asia Minor and returned to Asgard. Kai probably guessed who he had met. Or rather, it could be a god. Kai was not very familiar with Norse mythology before, but he has at least watched Marvel's Thor movies. I also know that Frost Giant, Fire Giant, Dwarf, and Asgard are elements of Norse mythology. It's not difficult to guess when considering my own experiences in Asia Minor. Although he did not encounter Odin or Thor, many things combined to confirm that Asgard was the prototype of Norse mythology. Later on, he thought about it and realized that it was normal for him not to have encountered Odin and Thor, because although he was unsure of the exact era he lived in, it should be BC. Kai has not yet discovered the Jewish race in the Middle East. Which means it was still a long time before the birth of Jesus. So there is nothing wrong with it before BC. Thinking about it this way, it's really normal that Odin wasn't born during this period. By the way, speaking of this, there is another interesting story. This time, when Kai returned to northern Europe from Asia, he stopped by to visit his friend, the king of Asgard, Bli. At that time, Bree was not there. It was Bree's son, Bauer, who received him. At that time, Kai accidentally slipped his tongue and asked Asgard if he had a child named Odin. Bauer is actually very sincere. He really helped Kai search around and found that there was not a child named Odin. Bauer was curious why Kai wanted to find a child named Odin. Kai could only make up his mind, saying that he had heard from a place that a child named Odin would have great achievements in the future. Bauer really believed this statement, so he decided to name his first child Odin, so the name of the future king of the gods was determined. However, at that time Kai was already numb, so he wasn't very excited. Can he tell Bauer that he not only met the legendary Olympian gods in the east, but also accidentally turned Zeus green? Even further away in the Sumerian region, they encountered the legendary Gilgamesh and fought against the ancient Egyptian gods along with this first human hero king. In summary, it was precisely because of these strange and bizarre experiences that Kai completely understood that this world was completely different from his original world. At least in his world, the people he met above were all mythological figures. Previously, when Kai traveled across the country and encountered King Uther and King Arthur, it can be said that there was a misunderstanding in history. After all, in the world of his past life, it is doubtful whether Arthur really existed or not, and it cannot be ignored. Perhaps he really existed. But when those mythological characters stood in front of Kai alive, the conclusion was easily drawn. Previously, Kai had always thought that he only needed to travel through time and return to the future, but now it seems that he not only needs to travel through time, but maybe even the whole world needs to travel through it. However, Kai still did not give up. After finishing his journey in Asia Minor, he decided to continue to the east. After all, no matter what, that place is also the closest to home. But the next blow will be even greater. Kai, Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and others set off for the east. Only Kai and Gilgamesh returned, while Enkidu and a group of accompanying soldiers all fell. On the road to the east, there are countless monsters and terrifying disasters caused by countless mysterious forces. Kai and Gilgamesh were both lucky to come back alive. The road back home is completely cut off. Thinking about all these things, Kai unknowingly drank up a pot of wine. Just as Kai was about to turn around and fetch another pot of wine, a cloak draped over Kai's body. It turned out to be Morgana. She hasn't slept. She was very happy tonight, really happy, so excited she couldn't sleep. Then I accidentally discovered Kai drinking on the terrace. Seeing him drinking outside so late, Morgana was afraid that he would catch a cold, so she found a cloak to put on Kai. Kai had just been immersed in his own world and had not even noticed the arrival of Morgana. It's so late, don't drink anymore. It's not good for your health. Although Kai's behavior tonight almost revealed the relationship between the two, Morgana is still a bit shy at this moment. Kai looked at the beautiful Morgana and suddenly felt a sense of absurdity in his heart. In his past life, he was just a small police officer with little money, busy and dangerous work. It's really hard for a good girl to like him. Now that there is such a beautiful girl who is deeply in love with her, what else can she be affected by? At this thought, Kalu smiled and buried her longing for her hometown in the deepest part. Since we can't go back, let's live a good life here. Probably. Chapter 10. Footwall. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The move is too slow. Hurry up. Be firm. Didn't you have breakfast? Use force. In the morning, after breakfast, Kai stood on the training ground of the knights again after a decade of absence to educate his younger brother Arthur. Just like 10 years ago, my younger brother will always be my younger brother, and Arthur, who grew up, still has no strength to fight back in front of Kai. After the competition began, the wooden sword in his hand did not even touch Kai. Even though Kai was wearing armor, his agile movements and footsteps still made Arthur look like a big bear that couldn't catch bees. He could only clumsily wave his long sword in his hand, then watch Kai deftly dodge and fiercely strike his wooden sword at himself. Although Kai's attacks were all reserved, hitting him only caused a slight pain and did not actually cause any damage, the repeated hits still dealt tons of damage to Arthur's soul. Kai was Arthur's enlightenment teacher, and his swordsmanship was taught by Kai. At that time, Arthur was still young and couldn't beat Kai. It was normal for Kai to repair him all day. But 10 years have passed, and Arthur originally thought that the gap between him and Kai would narrow no matter what, and even imagined that he could surpass Kai at one point. After all, Arthur's talent is evident to everyone, and over the years, he can almost be called invincible in the knights, which makes Arthur a little inflated. As a result, our young Arthur was brutally beaten by reality. Just like 10 years ago, he still has no strength to fight back. And this is still a situation where Kagan didn't take it seriously. Footsteps. Footsteps. I've always told you before, you must be steady. You can be slow, but you must be steady. You can't even stand steady in battle, how can you fight others? After evading Arthur's attack again, Kai lightly swung his wooden sword and hit Arthur's leg bend. As a result, Arthur couldn't stand steady and stumbled forward. This makes Kai very dissatisfied. Before joining the army in his previous life, Kai graduated from a martial arts school and was barely considered a practitioner of martial arts. He had also studied under his master, who was not a famous master, but also a disciple of the Tianjin Tianshi 8 Extremes Fist. Due to limitations in talent, one can only make a living in a martial arts school, but ultimately comes from a prestigious and upright background, so the basic requirements are very high. In addition, Kai is a serious disciple, and his master is not polite, so he has been very strict since childhood. When Kai was studying in his past life, he didn't feel anything was wrong because neither his master nor his family allowed him to fight and cause trouble, which means he was slightly stronger than an ordinary person. It wasn't until he became a soldier that he realized how important those foundations were. In the military, Kai relied on his solid foundation to perform exceptionally well in daily training. The training progress was much faster than that of the same year's soldiers, and it was because of this that he was selected as a scout. Among all the foundations, the bottom market is of utmost importance. Unstable footwork in the lower market can lead to a floating gait. The whole person looked weak and powerless, as if floating back and forth, and was knocked down with just one sweep. In martial arts, the logic of luck mostly starts from the lower abdomen, with the focus on the waist. For example, a chestnut. Stand still. Twist the waist. Turn the hips. Send punches, and that's how strength comes out. If the market is unstable, borrowing power is not enough, and the fist power is extremely weak, making it impossible to exert its power. If the lower body stabilizes, the stability of the person will be higher, and the body will be able to maintain stability between twists and turns. In the process of anti-bow, it will also be faster and more powerful. Previously, Kai's master Cheng told Kai that when it comes to martial arts practitioners, one should first look at their legs. See if he has the strength and stability to walk. If his footsteps are floating, this kind of person is definitely a gimmick. Although he looks good, if he really fights, he can immediately see the height. Kai has always remembered this truth in his life, so he stood on horseback and never fell behind in a day. As his own little brother, Kai naturally taught Arthur this way. After 10 years of not seeing each other, Arthur actually forgot all his teachings. This is also a common problem among Celtic knights. They habitually exercise their strength first, then learn swordsmanship. There is no specific training method for the lower body, and at most, they just squat while holding a stone pier. And to be honest, Kai's set of things is really silly to others, and the posture of his horse stance is really not elegant. But Kai never expected that his usually obedient younger brother would also forget his explanation. This makes Kai very unhappy. Arthur, he is Arthur. He is destined to be king. In this era, a king must possess strength because it is not safe, like the griffin that day. Is there only one griffin in the whole world? What are you joking about? There are many monsters like this outside the human activity zone. In this dangerous era, only strength can ensure people's survival. That same sentence, Arthur, he is Arthur. The title of King Arthur is not a joke. Even though former Sher Kai had little knowledge about foreign things, he knew some stories about the Night King. After so many ancient mythological figures appeared in front of him, Kai is now unsure if it was a coincidence that Arthur was given this name. Yu reading www.uukangshu.net. After all, even Zeus, Gilgamesh, and Odin have appeared. Why can't we have another King Arthur? Get up. Kai decided to give Arthur a profound lesson, to let him know the cost of laziness. Arthur, he is King Arthur. If he is really so weak, how can he change the legendary ending? If Kai didn't know Arthur, it would be fine. Now that Arthur has become his younger brother, he can't make Arthur accept that terrible ending. Although Kai's legend of King Arthur is limited to Arthur being very picky, then he was turned green, then he was betrayed, and then he hiccuped. I'm not very familiar with the rest, and he's not even very clear about how Arthur ended up. After all, Kai from his previous life did not have any special hobbies in this area. He was born into a typical traditional Chinese family. Apart from occasionally listening to foreign songs and watching a few blockbusters, he rarely took the initiative to learn about foreign cultures. Kai has a very simple view, which is that as long as Arthur is stronger than the legend, he can definitely change his fate. Arthur is not a child anymore. It's impossible for him to cry after falling. He quickly stood up. Raised the sword again. The education he received did not allow him to easily give up. Seeing Arthur's resolute appearance, Kai felt a little comforted. Think of something else, otherwise I'll doubt what you've been doing in the past decade. After speaking, Kai picked up another wooden sword from the nearby shelf. I forgot to say, Kai is a double sword flow, he doesn't like the sword and shield flow that knights like the most. Kai held a sword flower in his right hand, a wooden sword in his right hand, and a wooden sword in his left hand until Arthur. Start. With Kai's explosive shout. Kai slipped his legs and charged towards Arthur, with a diagonal slash from his right wooden sword pointing straight at his head.